There's a moment you've probably felt, sitting in a group, the room filled with laughter, casual chatter, endless small talk, and suddenly you feel it. The pull to leave. Not because you hate people, not because you're rude, but because your brain just checks out. You're listening, but everything feels shallow, plastic, recycled. You start asking yourself, is this it? Is this what everyone's so excited about? That's not arrogant speaking. That's awareness, and it's lonely as hell. You're not the only one. Some of the greatest minds in history felt the exact same discomfort. They weren't trying to be antisocial. They were just wired differently, cursed with the ability to see through the noise, to hear the emptiness behind the words, to notice how often people talk just to avoid silence, not to say something real. If you enjoy videos like this, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Schopenhauer said it best. The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. In other words, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not paying attention. This discomfort isn't a bug in your personality. It's a signal, a sign that you're waking up in a world that's addicted to distractions. You're not bored because you're broken. You're bored because you're honest. The truth? Most people aren't thinking. They're coping. They're scrolling, gossiping, filling every gap with noise. And when you start craving silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of meaning, you become the outsider. It hurts at first. You'll question yourself, try to shrink your thoughts to fit the room. But here's the raw truth. Maybe you're not meant to fit. Maybe you're meant to see. And that means your path is going to be quieter, harder, but infinitely more real. You ever feel like your brain is running a dozen tabs at once, and none of them will close? It's not anxiety. It's not overthinking. It's awareness without rest. You notice too much. You question everything. And somewhere in the chaos, you start craving the one thing that society seems to fear the most: silence. But not just any silence. Not the kind that comes with turning off the TV. You want mental silence, a stillness that lets your thoughts stretch out without being trampled by noise. That's what Schopenhauer meant when he said, the more a man has in himself, the less he will need from the outside world. See, the deeper your thoughts go, the more suffocating surface-level interaction becomes. You start avoiding birthday parties, group chats, even calls, not because you've become cold, but because you've become precise. You no longer have the patience for conversations that orbit nothing, for jokes repeated out of habit, for people who panic at the thought of being alone with themselves. And here's where the split happens. The world sees solitude as loneliness. But for those who think deeply, solitude is oxygen, a place to recharge, reflect, and remember who you are. Tesla refused to attend social gatherings because he knew his ideas were born in stillness, not in noise. Emily Dickinson lived most of her life inside a single house and wrote some of the most piercing lines in literature. Coincidence? Not at all, because the deeper your mind goes, the more it needs space, and silence is space for the soul. The crowd distracts, but silence reveals. So if you've been craving more time alone lately, if people keep asking, "Are you okay?" just because you're quiet, you're not broken. You're clearing space for clarity. And that clarity will cost you the crowd. There's a hidden tax on seeing things deeply, and no one tells you about it. It's not the workload, it's not the complexity, it's the distance, the emotional space that opens up between you and everyone else when your thoughts start piercing through what most people accept without question. The smarter you are, the lonelier it gets. Not because you're better, not because others are less, but because most people are wired for comfort, not for truth. And truth, real, raw, uncomfortable truth, is a terrible dinner guest. It ruins fake smiles. It shatters illusions. It asks the kind of questions that make people shift in their chairs. Think about it. How do you talk about existential dread at a barbecue? Or bring up the absurdity of chasing status during lunch at the office? You can't, so you learn to keep it in. Smile, nod, pretend. And over time, pretending becomes exhausting. This is the exile no one prepares you for, not physical isolation, but intellectual loneliness. You can be surrounded by people and still feel like an alien. You want connection, desperately, but every time you try, you hit a wall of indifference, or worse, misunderstanding. Voltaire once said, The secret of being boring is to say everything. He wasn't joking. When you know too much, you learn to shut up, not out of fear, but out of mercy. Because the more you share, the more you see people glaze over, or shrink away, or turn hostile. And slowly, you stop talking. Not because you have nothing to say, but because the world doesn't want to hear it. That's the paradox. You long to be understood, but you refuse to shrink just to be accepted. So you drift, not out of arrogance, but because you've realized you can't fly at your height and still be hugged by the ground. Solitude can feel like freedom, until it doesn't. At first, it's peaceful, powerful even. You breathe deeper, think clearer. Finally, you're not being pulled in 1,000 directions, but stay in it long enough, and the silence starts whispering back, not wisdom, but wait. That's the paradox no one warns you about. The more you free yourself from the noise, the more you risk drowning in the quiet. Even the great minds cracked under that pressure. Nietzsche called it the burden of the overman, the price of seeing what others ignore. He wandered alone most of his life, and in his final years, slipped into madness. Emily Dickinson, despite her brilliance, died in near total isolation. And Schopenhauer, he wrote of solitude as liberation, but lived plagued by bitterness and contempt for the world that never truly saw him. Here's the hard truth. Thinking differently makes you free, but it doesn't make you invincible. You'll have moments where the loneliness doesn't feel noble. It just feels heavy. You'll scroll your contacts and realize there's no one you can really call, not to talk, to connect. You'll sit in a room filled with silence and feel it closing in, like walls that don't echo back. That's the danger. What begins as clarity can curdle into cynicism. You start resenting the world for being shallow, but you also start resenting yourself for not being able to enjoy it like everyone else. You feel untouchable, and at the same time, untouched, because even freedom has a cost, and that cost is belonging. So you're faced with a brutal question. Would you rather be surrounded and asleep, or awake and alone? Most never ask it. They numb themselves with noise. But if you've made it this far, if you've chosen the harder path, then maybe what you're feeling isn't failure. It's the weight of flying without a flock. At some point, you realize disappearing isn't the answer. Neither is fitting in. So what do you do when the crowd drains you, but isolation starts to rot you from the inside? You detach, strategically, not like a hermit who vanishes, but like a warrior who chooses when to draw his sword. This is what Schopenhauer figured out, and what most people never do. You don't have to hate people. You just have to stop expecting depth from shallow waters. You don't have to shut the world out. You just have to stop giving it front row access to your mind. Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's choosing peace over performance, silence over spectacle. Think of it like this. You're in a noisy room, everyone's shouting, music blasting, distractions everywhere, but instead of screaming over the chaos, you put on noise-canceling headphones. You're still there, you see it all, but it doesn't invade you anymore. That's detachment, and it's your only real shield. Marcus Aurelius said, "Give yourself the gift of indifference to things outside your control." That includes people's opinions, their validation, their misunderstanding. Once you stop needing the crowd to get you, you finally get yourself back. It's not about running away from society. It's about filtering it, choosing a few people who get it, even a little, and letting the rest be background noise. Not everyone needs to be close. Not everyone should be. So if you're tired of feeling misunderstood, drained, or mentally fragmented, here's your next step. Stop begging to be seen. Start choosing to stay centered. Because if your energy is your currency, attention is your wallet. And you've been making change for people who never deserved a seat at your table. So here you are, a mind that sees too much, a soul that feels too much, standing at the edge of a world that runs on autopilot, and realizing you can't go back, not without pretending, not without amputating pieces of who you are. You've tasted solitude. At first it felt like exile, but slowly it starts feeling like home. That's not failure, that's evolution. Schopenhauer wasn't celebrating loneliness. He was recognizing what few dare to say out loud. Thinking deeply costs something. You lose the comfort of being like everyone else. You lose the ease of belonging without effort. But you gain something even more powerful: authenticity, clarity, depth. You stop performing, you start becoming. And yes, it hurts. The silence gets loud. The days stretch longer. The need for connection doesn't go away. But now, instead of chasing noise, you start creating meaning. Instead of begging to be understood, you start understanding yourself. This is the maturity most people never reach. They confuse being liked with being whole. But the truth is, the mind that craves truth will always outgrow the rooms built for comfort. Solitude, then, isn't a punishment. It's a threshold, a rite of passage into a deeper version of you. You don't have to reject society completely. You just have to stop letting it define your worth. Choose who you let in. Filter what you absorb. Protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. And when you walk through life this way, something shifts. You no longer feel alone in your solitude. You feel anchored in it. So ask yourself now, do you want to be embraced by the crowd or held by your truth? Because you can't have both. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the like and subscribe button